Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing very well and delighted to be able to do a program with you this morning.
Thank you.
But we're going to not be repetitious, but we're going to bring up a subject that I think our viewers are very interested in. It has to do with Saudi Arabia, what's going on there, what's going on in Lebanon, what's going on in Yemen. We've talked about this a whole lot, but it seems like things are moving along rather quickly. On the change in kings in Saudi Arabia, it looks like it might be happening pretty soon, and Mohammed bin Salman looked like it's been predicted that he could be taken over in a couple of days, and of course he's really been the boss anyway, but it's still significant. And then we had the routing out of some family members. They had a couple dollars stashed away, $800 billion, and he's lining up the financial ducks. So they're getting things ready. But then the military stuff is bad. You know, we've been partners with Saudi Arabia for a long, long time, you know, both in the oil business and the dollar rigging and then now in fighting Yemen. And right now, things are just a total disaster in Yemen. But it's all Iran's fault. We know that, you know. So that's why now they want to go to the, I was being facetious, of course, about Iran. Now they want to go to the UN and get more sanctions against Iran and also in Yemen. And right now, it is said that there's probably 7 million Yemenis that are on the verge of starvation, and they're going to the UN to put on more sanctions and close down all ports, everything, and try to starve the people to death, thinking that's going to change the leadership. At the same time, you know, we don't have much respect for the United Nations, but every once in a while they make an effort and pretend that they care about the refugees. Feed the refugees and go for peace and have ceasefires. But you'd think they would have some concern, but I haven't been able to find any information to say they've really tried to help these people who are suffering and dying at the hands of this war that Saudi Arabia and the United States is waging against them. So to me, it is an awful mess, and Saudi Arabia now has announced, get out of Lebanon. Yeah. If you're a Saudi, get out, which means that they line up the money, they get the UN behind them. They said, watch out in Saudi Arabia. I'm sure Israel knows exactly what's going on here. And who knows what's going to happen, but it doesn't look like things are getting any better. It doesn't look like peace is coming soon to that peninsula.
And that's kind of why we wanted to go back to the topic again, even though we've done it already this week, because a couple of breaking things, and you touched on them in your intro. The idea that King Salman may step aside, essentially he has not been the de facto king for a while, the son's consolidating, and the issue of the Saudi government's issuance of a notice to its citizens in Lebanon that they should leave right away. You got to leave the country, and obviously, you know, that has happened before. They tend to do this every now and again for dramatic effect. However, when you put a few things together, there's something to be concerned about. And of course, you had this bizarre situation where the Lebanese Prime Minister was in Saudi Arabia and resigned from Saudi Arabia. Now they're saying they won't let him leave. So here he is, he's stuck in Saudi Arabia, and also President Hadi from Yemen is also being held under house arrest. So what on earth is going on in the House of Saud? They're attacking their own family. They're holding foreign leaders hostage. They seem to be going haywire.
And they do want to place all the blame on Iran putting these missiles in. And there's been two episodes. One in July, there was a missile launch supposedly from Yemen. It went into Saudi Arabia, and the reports make the assumption that this could have been made in Iran. Not that that's the end of the world, but they claim that's a fact. But it's interesting that the escalation now that's coming, this emphasis of more and more sanctions, really punishing the Yemeni people, is that this new missile that supposedly Saudi shot down, you know, even in the UN report and Vicky Haley's report, they don't even say it is Iranian. They say it may be. They're willing to go to this extent of setting the stage here for strong military action against the government of Lebanon and Hezbollah, of course. And they don't even claim that they know who made the missile, but they probably don't really care. But it's interesting that they were cautious in not saying that they knew that this came from Iran. So it's in a way it could turn out to be a pseudo false flag type of thing. But the whole thing is exaggerated because the war wasn't started by the Houthis. They didn't go out and say, well, let's have a war. Let's take on Saudi Arabia and America and Israel. Yeah, that's really wouldn't have been ever their decision.
Well, this is a neocon game. It's a classic neocon game. The UN report says may have come from Iran. And then what does Nikki Haley, our ambassador to the UN, do? She goes down and she delivers a statement assuming that it is from Iran. So they make that logical leap, just like 2002, 2003 with Iraq. Here's what she said. So the UN right now said may have come. Here's what she says. By providing these types of weapons to the Houthi militias in Yemen, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard is violating 2 UN resolutions simultaneously. We must hold Iran accountable. So she's making this, basically she's lying, let's just be honest. But I had a little clip from a report by IHS Janes, which is really one of the world experts on weapons and weaponry. That's what they're known for. Huge international conglomerate. I won't read the whole thing, but essentially they're saying that the missile fired, a new type of warhead, locally fabricated. Iran and North Korea have made these kinds of modifications of Scuds, but none of those match what was fired by the Yemenis. So essentially they're saying, based on what they can analyze from this missile, this is a homegrown missile from Yemen. But of course, truth does not matter much when you're pushing for war.
Well, in the big picture, I think what's going on here is the continuation of the Trump policy. The Trump policy of his campaign, the Trump policy ever since, and that is to undermine any opening up in negotiations, with Iran. He wants to undo that understanding that they would not work on a nuclear weapon. And nobody has ever suggested, they're not even suggesting this. There's this vague suggestion of a missile being, sent down to Yemen. So, but the main goal is to undermine that agreement, so that they can go back, and that, of course, may meet some resistance. Some of the allies, I think there were about 11 nations that signed that agreement, and the Europeans have signed it. I don't think they want to be that aggressive with Iran, and I don't think they're anxious to undo this as our government is.
Yeah, the EU officer in charge of foreign affairs, Federica Mogherini, she said we need to tone down, after Nikki Haley made her aggressive point, she said we need to tone down the rhetoric here, we need to calm it down. She's trying to dial things down. Nikki Haley only has one speed, fast forward, She refuses to step back. She's a protege of John Bolton. We know exactly where she's coming from as a neocon, and she's misleading us into war. There's no question about it.
And unfortunately, there's not much resistance in the Congress. I don't even know if they're thinking about it.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I saw some journalist, intrepid journalist, went to Capitol Hill, and he, and I know Congress members don't like this, so I understand why some of them were reticent, but he would interview them, catch them on the street, and say, why aren't you guys talking about this Yemen war? And even the one, Kinzinger, who was the most pro-war, he refused to talk about it,
Well, he said, his answer, I think he was the one that, his answer was also, well, we have more important things to talk about. We have to talk about this tax bill where they're getting nowhere on there, distraction. But they're not really interested in it. As long as it's moving in their directions and the neocons are in charge. This is a neocon foreign policy that we're dealing with in the Middle East. And right now, the crosshairs, it looks like they will continue to be aimed at Yemen, but it's also getting much more dangerous for anybody in Lebanon. And that means escalation And who knows? The Soviets. That's an old term.
Yeah.
But the Russians, finally, they got involved very much in Syria. So I'm sure they're keeping an eye on this. So we'll have to. It remains to be seen what kind of further escalation there'll be.
And just as we talked about, just as the Saudis have lost in Syria with their regime change operation, now they're moving the operation over to Lebanon. Saad Hariri, the prime minister who resigned from Saudi Arabia, is not allowed to return home. His own political party said, let him go, bring him back, let him come back to the country. So there's something very fishy about the whole thing. But the Saudis have taken him, they're holding him there, and they're saying, well, this is all the fault of Hezbollah. So they're essentially attacking Iran on two fronts, on the Yemen front and on the Lebanon front, to try to ratchet it up.
Yeah, and the question is, and I think we probably can guess what the answer is this a sign of strength with the Saudis, expansionism, making sure that everybody's taken care of, or could this be a sign of weakness, and they're desperate, and they've been losing in the Shia-Sunni war, which is the Saudi-Iranian war, which involves Russia and the United States and also the European governments. Maybe common sense will come to some of the European nations someday and say, hey, we don't need to be involved here. We sort of support what's happening, and we like the idea of trading a little bit with Iran. And you guys don't even have proof of anything. Yeah. And you made the point there that they're not absolutely positive about dismissal.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I'm not an expert on Saudi Arabia. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some kind of a palace coup against this king. First of all, he's stolen all of their money. They don't like that. What did you say? 800 billion he may have snagged. We know that their economy is a disaster. It's a basket case. The price of oil has never gone to where they wanted it to be able to survive. They have no other industry. So there are a lot of internal crises and conflicts in Saudi Arabia. It really does make me wonder. I mean, I think it's a great point. Maybe it's a sign of weakness rather than strength.
And one of their goals is to get the price of oil up, and they've artificially been able to do it and control the market. And the price has moved up. It's up like $57, close to $58 right now. Low compared to a couple years ago, but high compared to last year. And you might say, well, maybe they're achieving it, but it also may be going up because the markets are sensing that there could be disruption in an area. This could become very much of a hot war, and who knows what will happen. And the Iranians aren't going to walk away if they get attacked or they get involved. So I think that the price of oil is interesting to watch, but I don't think it gives you the full answer.
Yeah, and here's another thing that may be controversial in a way. Okay. We don't know that Iran provided this missile. In fact, evidence is to the contrary, at least according to Jane's, which is pretty well respected, very well respected. But why wouldn't Iran be allowed to provide weaponry? I mean, we don't like people firing rockets anywhere. It's a bad thing. But why would Iran be prohibited from? They were the ones invaded. Yemen was invaded. It didn't invade Saudi Arabia. The Saudis came in 2015, invaded the country, starving all of its people to death. Why wouldn't it? Why is it's almost sort of a red herring? Why wouldn't Iran be allowed to provide allies defensive weapons against a Saudi invasion?
And the words that they use, it always just sort of annoys me a lot, because all they have to say is, Iran is a destabilizer. They've destabilized everything. And where do we live? Do we live in the neighborhood over there? Do we do any destabilizing? And have we ever given a weapon to anybody? Have we ever? And here we're the ones that have destabilized it by being a military alliance. I mean, before it used to be more economics and oil and all, but now this is strong military alliance. It's been going on for 2 years, and the people are suffering, and all they can do is go back. And since we sort of run the show more than I ever realized, whether it's the UN or NATO or whatever, we go there and get these resolutions passed. And if they were worth their salt, they might say, why don't you guys back off? There's millions of people dying from this war, so why don't you call a ceasefire? But they don't even suggest that. They say tougher sanctions, and that doesn't bode well.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to go out on a limb with predictions, but I don't think this trajectory can continue. I think something is going to break within the next week or so. My final word would be, let's not forget this Israeli cable that came out. We talked about it the other day, where the Israeli Foreign Ministry instructed its diplomatic missions to back Saudi policy in Yemen. How deep is Israel wanting to get involved in the wars, the fights that Saudi Arabia is picking with Yemen and Lebanon? My guess is they're going to be a little bit more careful than it seems.
You know, this is an example of trying to figure out where the important things are happening, and right now we obviously are thinking that in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia and Lebanon and Yemen, very important place, and things are developing, but they're really not in the news. What was in the news, and this might not be an accident, is our president is over in the Far East, and he has said things about China which has been a lot different than it was in the campaign, and he also, you know, actually threw out an olive branch to a degree, you know, with North Korea and everything. Enough to say, hey, you know, maybe this is not quite as bad as everybody anticipated. Maybe we're not going to have a nuclear war real soon. But sometimes these things are staged. So everybody, I bet you 90%. Are concentrated on the Far East and say things are getting better. At the same time, they're deteriorating in the Middle East, and who knows what's going to happen. But we will soon know. We'll see if the predictions come true that King Salman resigns or is replaced, because right now there's a lot of people who not overly confident with Mohammed bin Salman because of his experience and the friction going on, and just right now the undermining of some very, very rich relatives and taking of $800 billion. Well, that's not going to sit well. So there's a lot to watch there, and we'll do our best to keep up with it. But once again, we have done too much contributing to this problem over there, and for our own sake, for our own safety, security, and financial being, we ought not to be over there. If the Europeans want to get out of there and the local people aren't looking for a fight, why don't we just decide that maybe a different approach to foreign policy? Why do we feel obligated to confront people and pretend that we own the world? Eventually that's going to backfire on us, and all empires end badly, and this one will too, but don't ask me to predict when it's going to happen. Could be soon, but it could go on for a long time, and a lot more people could suffer at the hands of our foreign policy. Hopefully we can persuade people to consider and maybe move in the direction of non-intervention. I think that would be a wise step if we want to promote peace and prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report.